Okay, just to let everybody know that I will be recording this session so that I can share it with other parents later. Everybody that's here will take a list of the participants and ensure that everybody receives a copy of this as well. Any questions that appear in the chat during this webinar, we can refer to those later and add extra slides onto the presentation if we don't already answer them. Okay, I'd first like to start by welcoming everybody. It's lovely to see so many people have joined us. Thank you for taking the time to do so this morning. I appreciate how busy everybody is. I recognise that many of you have feelings about technology in education, perhaps particularly about a BYOD programme. Hopefully we will go through all of that this morning. My name is Andy Tallett. I'm the assistant head of the primary school here with responsibility for technology. I've included my email address there so that anyone can message me later privately. On this call, we've got Mr. Mann, the interim principal. We've got Miss LeBain, head of primary, Mr. Dodge, deputy head of primary. We've also got Zoe Hancock, the director of admissions and marketing. Throughout the webinar, I'm going to go through the aims and the rationale behind the BYOD programme, talk about why I feel technology is so important in education. I'll talk about some additional benefits that I feel that come beyond the main aims. And then I will also address common concerns that people have. I'm going to talk briefly about devices today, but I'm not going to go into great depth about that. As you saw from my letter, we're not talking about specific devices. It's more a laptop, a two-in-one rather than a tablet is the main thing. But anybody that wishes to receive advice on that, you can contact me using the email address above. And I'm going to give some examples of how I foresee technology being used in years 5 and 6. So hopefully that will give people a real taste of why we're so keen to support this programme. I'm going to start just by talking about technology in education in general. I think it's fair to say that education is adapting. It's always adapting, and we have to make sure that we are keeping pace with that. I recognise that people have views on education based on their own experiences, and quite often it's a generational thing. If people weren't raised using technology as part of their lessons, it's a bit harder to see how that is going to be a benefit. I think for us as a school, there's always a challenge with deciding when to get on board, and you see I've included this diffusion of innovation model here. I certainly wouldn't say that we are one of the first schools to introduce this. Many schools, or I'd say most schools now, are moving to a BYOD model. I'd say that particularly with year 5, we're hitting this right at the peak of this model. We're neither one of the first to do it, and I'd hate to think that we were one of the last to be doing this. I think that we've chosen, or carefully chosen, the right time to get on board with them. I'd just like to mention this quote by the famous educational reformer and philosopher John Dewey, that if we teach today as we taught yesterday, then we're robbing our children of tomorrow. And I think that's a really important message to think about throughout this webinar, that we have to keep adapting. We have to stay up to date with what's happening in education. And that's a part of the BYOD programme philosophy. Okay, so the main aims of introducing technology in education. For me, it's about this 21st century learning and helping children to develop these 21st century skills, as they're referred to. Things like creativity, problem solving, working with other people, thinking globally and working with people from around the world, coming up with new ideas to solve problems. I've mentioned a few of them there, but there are others. Technology these days is far more than just knowing how to use Microsoft Office. Computing is far more than just showing the children how to code. It's about working together with other people, bringing in lots of different skills across lots of different platforms, being able to research effectively and safely and using that within your work. And if we're not helping our children to gather these skills, then we really are going to be making it much harder for them to get jobs in the future. I'm going to be coming on to talk about how technology can be used to enhance the curriculum a little bit later, and that will tie in with giving the children authentic experiences. I feel it's widely recognised that when children are working on an authentic experience, when they are solving a real life problem, that they're not only far more engaged, but they can see how their work would be a real benefit in the wider world. And finally, one of the aims of the BYOD programme is that it's there to complement the iPads and the other technology that's provided by the school. I'm going to talk a little bit more later about what we're doing in that particular area, but I don't want parents thinking that we're just passing this solely on to them. It's about complementing what we have here in school. Okay, I feel that there are many additional benefits that come alongside using technology in the classroom. I wouldn't want parents to focus on any one of these in particular. They're all different facets and all benefits in their own right. I'm going to go through a few of them. As I've said, if anyone has any particular questions, feel free to put it in the chat, which is being monitored by some of my colleagues. Although I will leave people muted until the end of the presentation, my colleagues would be able to chip in if there's anything really pertinent. And then at the end, there'll be a chance for people to answer questions. Although ideally, I think if people could message me, then I'll be able to get back to them in more detail. So being computer literate is obviously a huge part of this. We work with the children across different platforms, namely Google and the Microsoft Office suite. Ensuring that children are familiar with both of these, because in secondary school, moving on to university, if they go to university, and then certainly in the working world, they're likely to come across different platforms and need to be familiar with both of these. So when we talk about children presenting at the end of a project, it's not about teaching them how to use Microsoft PowerPoint per se. It's about teaching them what are the skills behind being a good presenter, letting the children select the platform that is the most suitable for what they want to do. Digital citizenship is a huge part of what we do here at the school. That encompasses ensuring the children are safe, but also being good digital online users, understanding things like etiquette, what we mean by personal information, how much they should be sharing with other people, what to do when they encounter strangers or if they have a problem on a particular website. Obviously, if we're doing that day to day, it provides far more learning opportunities and opportunities for discussion within the classroom around that. We are entering a digital world. Many things are moving online. Year 6 this year have been introduced to something called Atom Learning. It's an adaptive learning platform that really focuses on personalised learning. So we are using it for homework in year 6 at the moment, and we would love to roll that out to year 5. Each week teachers set English and maths homework using that platform, and what the children receive is a set of questions that adapt to their learning. So if they are really confident with the work, the questions will get progressively harder. If they need support, they've got access to help guides, videos, and the questions will adapt to their level. We also use Google Classroom a lot for keeping work organised and distributing resources, and can also be used for collecting work in. I feel it's important to recognise that things like Google Classroom are a modern way for people to stay organised. I'm sure many people in their workplace use something similar, and this is an educational tool that really helps us to train the children to be organised with their work and what they're doing online. Just briefly mention about projects extending beyond the classroom. My background is working in computing, being a computing teacher across the entire primary school. So I do understand this particular facet. When I've launched a project with children in the computer suite, because it's a 45-minute lesson each week, they're so enthused and excited by it that they want to continue that work outside of school. And that I see as one of the benefits of using technology more in the classroom, that children, although not pressured to, are happy to continue working on things outside of school, and they have that option to work collaboratively with their group on that. Another benefit, I know some people feel that we already have computing lessons. As I've said, that's 45 minutes each week. We quite often receive, or we sometimes receive, communications from parents saying that we should be doing more. So it's, as a school, we have to find the right balance within our curriculum allocation to ensure that children are getting enough access to technology and learning these skills. Obviously, having BYD allows us to use technology in other curriculum areas. For example, this year we've started taking the devices to music using something called BandLab. The children can use their devices in Mandarin, which I'm sure you can imagine can be a great help for seeing models and seeing characters on the screen. In English, I will talk about English specifically as I go to the concerns, because I feel that's important to address that. But we do at times use the laptops in English, but it's not a direct replacement for working in books. And I really want to stress that. As an organisation, Nord Anglia is subscribed to Microsoft Office 365. As part of that subscription, it does allow every child in the school to download the full version of the Office suite for free to their device. This is a huge benefit. It does allow the children to use this at home with no cost and no additional cost to parents. I'm also want to point out that we feel having these devices does help children to become more responsible. I know some people feel that children might not be responsible enough to be carrying a device to this time, but we feel that giving them the opportunity to helps them to learn that. There's exciting news coming from Nord Anglia Education at the moment. There's going to be a new project launched over the summer called Project Apollo that is helping teachers to use more technology in the classroom. So although this is not what's driving the BYOD programme, it's certainly going to be an additional benefit having that. We also, in August, will be looking at moving to more digital portfolios across the school. I think the pandemic and everything that's happened this year has helped us realise that we should be better prepared for every eventuality. Obviously, many people move to having devices at home, and should we ever need to close the campus again, or should we ever be instructed to close the campus again, I feel having children fully equipped would obviously be a benefit, but again, that's not what's driving the decision. It's just I feel an additional benefit. And obviously we're preparing the children for moving through other stages of their education. The sooner children become very familiar with these programs, with things like video conferencing, with collaborating with others, then that's going to help them focus more on the particular activity as they move through other stages of their education. Okay, I do appreciate that there are concerns. I don't think that any school has ever introduced a BYOD programme and not had anybody ask questions. We'd expect that. So I would just like to go through some of these now. These are what I feel are the main things that I've picked up from talking to parents, but if there are further questions, I can certainly address those individually. People are welcome to write to me, and if there's a common theme, then I can share that with all parents. So I'm going to go through each of these one at a time. So what is the research saying? So as I said, we're not one of the first schools to do this, far from it. We introduced this in the secondary school initially, then we rolled it out to Year 6 2 years ago, and we've spent time looking at that, evaluating that, and putting lots of things in place as a school behind the scenes, increasing Wi-Fi capacity in the IT administration team and so on. So this is not a decision that's been taken lightly, is the point I want to make. We look particularly at this report from the Education Endowment Foundation. If you're not familiar with this organisation, it's a UK charity that's involved with the Sutton Trust, and it receives most of its funding from the Department of Education. And the reason that the Department of Education work with them is they like them to look into particular issues. For exactly that reason, they don't want to spend a lot of money on something unless it's backed by research. So when this presentation is shared with you later, you can click on this image here and it will take you to the website where you can read the report in more detail if you want to. But these four facets here have really influenced our decision, and it's what we focus on when we're using technology, particularly in the primary school, and would continue to do so. For number one in particular, we spend a lot of time thinking about how it will be used. It is not a case of getting the technology in first and then deciding how we're going to use it. It's the other way around. We've already started training staff, and as I said, Nord Anglia Education are going to be providing additional resources as part of that. There's clear evidence that you can access more and better quality models using technology. The children can look at models that are specific to a question they're working on, that are specific to the level that they are working at. Okay, so we've been very clear with our teachers that this is not to replace their modelling at the front of the classroom, it's to add to that, to complement it. I'll be talking about number 3 when I give you some examples of how technology is currently used and how it could be used in greater depth if we had the BYOD, or when we have the BYOD programme. But basically that's saying that there are opportunities where the children can do things that they would not be able to currently. And number 4, I think we've already started on that journey. We do some of our assessments online for various reasons. Obviously, we can get instant feedback. We can get a huge amount of analysis between classes and across the school for tracking things over time. But also, there's lots of tools that we have been starting to trial this year that would allow us to gather feedback and use that assessment for learning on a day-to-day basis. So knowing exactly where the children are and informing the following day's lessons. Screen time is obviously a concern for parents, and we completely understand that. We feel it's important to find a balance between school and home. We know that children use mobile devices, portable devices, laptops, games consoles, all sorts of things outside of school, and we do take that into consideration. We've given guidance to our teachers about the amount of time that children should be using devices and being aware of things like if they know they're using them in a music lesson that day or a Mandarin lesson, if they know they've got a computing lesson where they'll also be on a device, then taking that into consideration when they're planning lessons around that. We've also talked about screen-free lessons and days. On that issue, I want to emphasise the point that we would use technology when there's a clear benefit. So if we, on a particular day, are not allowing children to use technology, are we stopping them using it when it would have had a clear benefit? So I think it goes both ways. And at the bottom there, I've included something called the SAMR model. We've done training with our teachers on this previously, and it's something we would continue to work on. Basically, the first level of the SAMR model talks about substitution, and that's where you're using technology to replace something that could be done using a traditional method such as pen and a book. Okay, so there are cases where that can be useful, but we have suggested to our teachers that we aim for other levels of the SAMR model. We look at how we can make it possible for children to do things that they would not have been able to do without the technology, things such as working with other children around the world. Handwriting, I completely recognise parents' concerns on this one, and I want to be really clear. I sometimes think that there might be a little bit of a misconception that technology is going to replace books, that technology is going to be used in every English lesson for typing things that could be handwritten. That's really not the case. In fact, we tend to use technology for project work lessons rather than solely for English lessons, but hopefully you can see that in some instances, there is a clear benefit to using technology. And I give here the example of newspaper reports. Once we've taught children about direct and reported speech, if they are able to produce a newspaper report on a device, then they can far closer replicate what a newspaper report would be like in the real world, thinking about columns, different fonts, headings, inserting images, adding text box for captions and so on. So I would see that as a clear benefit of using technology for that particular piece. And I've put just this quote at the bottom here. I feel it's using technology as well as rather than children would be able to access work that's particularly at their level. If they need to reinforce something, then they can easily access additional questions on that. If they need to move on to something, or they need to see a video or something that particularly would help them with that question, then they can have that, but they're still working in their book at the same time. They're not completing it all on the device. It's about having that option of getting the device and using it. We quite often find that the Year 6 children to begin with would come in and say, are we using the laptops in this lesson in particular? And the teachers, over time, we've broken away from that, and it's about having it there. If the children need it, they can go and get it. It's not just they come into the lesson and they get them out straight away. And on that, I've just included a slide here that shows some of the typical uses of what devices might be used for. I've already talked about quizzes and assessments and how that's useful for gathering instant feedback on things, helping children to take responsibility for keeping things organised and learning about organisation and folders and so on. It's certainly about creating content, but it's also, as I've said at the bottom there, about processing and working with content that's been produced elsewhere. The school does have a large amount of iPads. The children would continue to use those as well. We've got a media suite that the children can use, and then sometimes they can save that file and then come back and work with it as part of a project. A huge part of this for me is the collaborative side, children working together on things. Yes, they can do that. They can work in table groups on posters and large pieces of paper. But for me, this is about harnessing the technology to improve that, make it easier for them to work together, to comment on each other's work, to edit things. Online safety is clearly another concern, and that's very understandable. We feel that having the technology around and using it more often helps children to become more responsible users. It provides those opportunities for discussion on a day-to-day basis rather than just during their computing or ICT lessons. Teachers are constantly monitoring, walking around the room, and as a school we're monitoring as we have the school firewall. We have things set up like Google Safe Search, and we talk to the children a lot about searching, and I'll come on to that in just a moment. Online etiquette is a huge thing. I think there's going to be a generational shift in the coming years where social media companies are having to take a lot more responsibility for what is being posted on their platform. But at the moment, many older users do think that anything that goes online, they don't have any responsibility for it. And I think if we can teach children from day one that they are responsible for their digital footprint, and talking to them about etiquette, even how to speak to people online, then that's going to stand them in good stead. This is a huge one for me, the next point, educating rather than restricting or blocking. If a child comes across or accidentally comes across an inappropriate image on Google, as a school, I'm not a fan of then going and blocking all children from using Google. We know that in the real world, children are going to be using it at home, they're going to be using it as they move through their education. So it's about educating children how to respond to that. Who do they need to speak to about that? Whenever parents have contacted me about issues at home in the past, I say it's about sitting down with children, talking to them about how they can report things online, rather than instantly restricting or blocking them from that. And I understand that parents will have differing views from me on that, but I firmly believe that. Having technology in the classroom also allows us to reinforce messages that are taught through the ICT and computing curriculum. We have a thorough digital citizenship programme in place. It covers many things, and this is just a few of them, about passwords, personal information, fake news and so on. But if you're talking about that message day in, day out, then it's really going to help the children to take that on board. Being responsible. We've talked this year about the cabinets that we've had with Year 6, the pouches that many children bring their laptops into school with, and we've making a couple of recommendations to improve that. So we've worked with one of our suppliers to redesign the cabinet. You can see that there, that would be going into the classroom, so that every child has got an individual slot that's numbered, so they know exactly where to find their device. These will be lockable, and at present, we suggest that children always take their device home at night, but we've talked about giving the option next year of allowing devices to stay in school. And one of the reasons we've strayed away from that before is that we feel, as part of a BYD programme, that it's important children have access to the devices in their own time, so that it's not felt that it's just buying something for school use solely. We also, from our experience, see that when children have something of value, such as a laptop, maybe it's been a Christmas present for them, or they've had to wait for a birthday, then it does help them to appreciate the value not only of that device but of other things. And the final point there, our Year 6 teachers throughout this year who have already had BYOD are doing termly PSHE lessons, particularly around the devices. So it's not only talked about in the ICT and computing lessons, but it's talked about at least once a term as part of the PSHE lessons. I'll just come back to the rigid cases. There's just one example there of a rigid case. If anyone's concerned about devices being transported around, some of these even come with a guarantee. So if anybody wanted to contact me, I can send that to you, but places like Amazon, and you just put rigid case, then you do come up with a wealth of very reasonable options. This particular one here I saw yesterday had about 65% off it at the moment, and was very good value. Someone also said about children carrying devices in their bags. We find that most children prefer to carry these cases using the handle. They carry it separately, but most of them do have space in their bag as well, because we don't expect children to bring lots of textbooks and so on. I suppose another benefit of having BYOD is lots of resources like that are stored on the device instead. Cost of device is of course a concern for people. In my letter to parents, I said about if you purchased a device last year when the campus was closed, if you through work or whatever you have devices that are no longer suitable and they're available for children to use, then that's absolutely fine. For us, it's more about the type of device rather than the brand. We do recommend a laptop or even a 2-in-1 if possible, rather than a tablet. There is some research that children typing on a screen is not ideal for their typing skills and so on. I know there are keyboards that you can attach to iPads and so on, but also one of our things is that we talk about the operating system through our subscription and that access to Office 365. The most complete and the full version of that comes with Windows devices. Now, we certainly don't say not to use Apple laptops, MacBook Pros or so on, and we find that many children do. You just get a slightly lighter version of Office 365 with Apple devices, and with iPads it's even lighter again. Somebody wrote to me and said, why do we not encourage iPads? This was certainly considered. We spent a lot of time talking about this as a school. We recognise that iPads are brilliant for content creation. We feel that devices such as laptops or 2-in-1s are perhaps better for working with content once it's been produced. And we felt the flexibility and the additional options that those devices give was why we then went with that model. We have as a school decided to purchase lots of iPads. Our experience shows that it's simpler when these are school owned and managed. In the last 18 months alone, we've bought close to 200 iPads that are in use across the school. We've spent a lot of time distributing these out to classrooms so that they can be used on a more regular basis, but they are not a complete solution. We feel that using iPads alongside laptops is the best option. And again, there might well be parents that in their particular role would disagree with me on that. I'm happy to discuss that with people. Okay, if I move on to a couple of examples of how I see technology being used in the classroom and how it's currently used, then it might help people to see that it's not just about using it for typing. Okay, so this is a unit that we do with Year 6, part of our international primary curriculum, called Going Global. This particular unit is all about introducing the children to fair trade. So the children start by doing some internet research about fair trade, and then they looked at creating an animation for the journey of a product around the world. Obviously in the past, it might be the same sort of activity that you do that with an A4 map and you draw how the product moves around, but the children are learning lots of additional skills through doing that on a device, and obviously it does come with a lot of engagement as well. The children then use something like Google Forms for conducting market research to identify a new product which could, or maybe even should, be considered for fair trade. Then working in their table teams, they had to set up a business. And this is where I talk about giving the children a real life problem, making learning authentic. Once they were in their teams and they had their business, they had to consider branding, and they had an option of different things that they could make on their devices. Think about how they were going to advertise not only the company but the particular product, and again they had options. So we do have the media suite where children can work with that. In their lesson they created jingles that they then came back to the class and used those jingles to make either a radio or TV advert. So it becomes more cross-curricular learning. There's a purpose to their learning that links with the theme in all lessons. We also touched on finances. So as part of our ICT and computing curriculum, we do teach the children about spreadsheets. They then have some of the skills that they can then adapt to a project like this. And in particular, it's talking about currency and money. Okay, so they're applying it to a real problem. And then at the end, it's about presenting to the class. I said earlier about it's giving the children a choice of how to present. It's not just like things might have been 5 or maybe 10 years ago, where the children would always work on a PowerPoint presentation. They might have a couple of slides, or they might choose to use their time to make things for helping them present rather than actually having anything on the screen. We have a unit in Year 5 all about fairgrounds. This is already a great unit. The children work in groups to make a particular ride, make a model of a particular ride, but here are some examples of how that could be enhanced with more technology available in the classroom. So you could experience a roller coaster using virtual reality headsets. And what we've talked about doing with that is recording the children whilst they're doing that, and then recording their quotes after they've had that experience. Again, they would then work in teams and select a particular ride at a fairground to promote. And within those teams, the children have different roles, and those roles would rotate around throughout the year. So the children have an opportunity to be leaders, but they might also have an opportunity to be in charge of the finances or head of marketing or so on. And in this particular unit, the children would work to make a collaborative website using Google Sites. So it's all managed within our ecosystem. It doesn't have to go live on the internet for anyone else to see. It can just be shared internally. But with that comes a huge amount of skills that the children could use in other ways throughout their school life, but potentially in a future job. So things like including pictures, embedding video, adding text and thinking how that's going to be formatted, and adding those quotes that we talked about earlier from where they had experienced the roller coaster. Site-specific skills or website-specific skills like adding hyperlinks, formatting and adding styling are things that you can use in a wealth of other software platforms. So whilst this is just one particular use, it then helps children to add hyperlinks in many other areas. Creating an interactive map, perhaps. We talk about writing for a purpose. If the children really want to win this fairground competition for their ride to be chosen, it gives them a huge amount of enthusiasm and engagement as part of that, thinking about writing to persuade. They can then also check each other's work, check it's as good as it can be. So they are commenting on each other's and going back and editing their work. As I said before, that can be done in books, but it's taking advantage of the technology where that can be easier to do it. Perhaps emailing someone in the industry. We find that children don't have an innate knowledge of how to email a professional, and they have to be taught that, the etiquette and the norms that come with that. Just to mention about emailing, the children don't have access to email unless we specifically turn it on as part of either the Office suite or the G Suite from Google. So it's not something they have access to unless we give that to them. Video conferencing is an area where many, perhaps billions of people around the world have had to learn very quickly over the last year. And we feel that's going to be a skill that children are going to need for the future. Many people are moving away from working in office buildings and they're moving to online platforms. So it's teaching the children, again, some of the etiquette and the norms with that. And again, at the end of that, this was presenting to a judging panel, perhaps in the Dragon's Den style. Another example that I'll give you particularly for Year 5, in the past, the children have created charity adverts. I've included here an example of an advert. You can play that in your own time later. And the charity advert they produced in the media suite is fantastic. Okay, the children had planned, written, and then recorded that. But what I would like to sort of explain is how the children could then use that they've recording that they've made as part of a larger project. So they come back to working in the classroom and they can use that as part of one of these units, just as a part of it, rather than it being the endpoint itself. So as I said, this has not been a rushed decision at the school. We spent a lot of time reviewing how BYOD has gone in Year 6. As I said, that's been 2 years now. It's been in Year 6 before we've considered introducing it to Year 5. Our Year 5 teachers have been chomping at the bit for this, and they've been asking us to introduce it, but we wanted to fully evaluate things. We wanted to ensure that we had looked at the educational benefits. We had looked at things we were putting in place, such as digital portfolios, such as things for AFL like Nearpod, perhaps. Some of you might be familiar with these tools, and we wanted to make sure that we'd done a lot of that work before we contacted parents. We've looked at a school at upgrading our hardware and in particular our Wi-Fi capacity. Every time we add a year group, we're talking about potentially another 175 devices being on the network at the same time. We're now approaching over 1,000 devices being on the network, and we have to take all that into consideration before we roll out programs like this. We've already begun training staff, as you would imagine, and that would continue into next year. I've already talked to you about lockable cabinets. These things have been months of preparation to ensure that these are right and fit for purpose. The digital literacy that we do week in, week out in our computer and ICT lessons, obviously that's something that would continue to make sure that children understand how to use technology responsibly. We would willingly talk to any parent that has concerns about how technology can be used outside of school. We recognise that is something that parents are not always sure whether they should be given children access to devices at home, or whether they should have limited amount of access to Wi-Fi and so on. And we've also looked at increasing our capacity in the IT administration department. We recognise that as more devices come into school, children and teachers require more support with that. So again, these things have been a long time in preparation. Okay, that does bring me to the end of the presentation. I hope that has been useful. As I've said, I would encourage people, when you receive this presentation later, you're very welcome to send me a message if you have concerns, if you have thoughts, if you have a specific question, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. If there are concerns that are consistent between parents, then I would look at addressing those and sending out further information to everybody. Okay, I'm just going to see from my colleagues whether there is anything in the comments that we want to address now.
Hi Andy, can you hear me? Have you unmuted me?
I can see that people have been responding to things as they've been coming in. So unless anybody would like to raise their hand and ask a particular question, then what I will probably do is give you the option to leave, and feel free to message me later once you've got my email address. Again, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I appreciate how valuable everybody's time is.
Andy, have you picked up Chris? Chris is communicating with you.
Hi Andy, can you hear me at all?
I'm just unmuting a couple of parents that had a raised hand just in case they want to say something.
Andy, can you hear me at all?
Okay, those parents that had a raised hand, I should have unmuted all those now in case you want to say something.
Andy, can you hear me at all? It's Chris.
Mr. Gupta, are you able to unmute yourself?
Hi. I'm a little unclear on will the students be encouraged to bring the device in every morning and take it home at 3 in general?
I'm sorry, I missed the start of that. Would you be able to just repeat that for us?
Yeah. Would the students be encouraged to bring the device in at 8 and take it home at 3 every day? Because that's like 1.5 kilos of extra weight. I'm concerned only about the weight point of view.
That is what we've done with Year 6 this year, but it's certainly something we could review next year. And if parents had concerns about that, we would give the option of devices being able to be left in school.
Okay. What about if? Yeah, but you want the device to be in school. Sorry, I was looking at the other way around. The device stays at home and is brought into school when it's required, but that will distract from the pedagogical approach of having technology available, I assume.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance, and I think it's certainly something that teachers could liaise with parents on. If they know there's a particular day where it was not going to be used, then I understand how it'd be helpful to know that in advance. But as you've just said, it does take away that benefit of the children being able to go and collect it if they felt it was useful.
Okay, so as I see, the main thing, the device should probably be 11.5 inch or 12 inch, 1 kilo not more than a kilo, because the bags I see for
ideally we recognise that adds on cost. Obviously, the lighter that a device is. All right, thank you, Mr. Gupta.
Andy, can you hear Chris Dodge?
You there, Chris?
I am, but I seem to be talking to myself.
Can you hear him now? I can hear him, Andy.
I can, yeah.
Ah, hello. Okay, I just made a note of some of the questions that came through early on the presentation, and I don't know if you want to address any now, whether you'd rather follow up via email afterwards. A couple of parents have been asking about whether the school teaches typing skills.
It's something that we tend to cover lower down as ICT and computing lessons, but I do have a wealth of good resources that I can share with any particular parents. I've already shared those with one parent who said that during the long break over the summer that's something they'd like to get their children working on. So yeah,
that's certainly a great one for home, and we did that with my son. We did that at home and put him through his typing exercises to get him up to speed. So yeah, that's something that can be done at home rather than us using curriculum time on that, and it's great fun.
Yeah, and the ones I recommend are all free, actually.
Yeah, BBC Dance Mat is a good one.
Yeah.
And there's a question about whether we would advise parents to install parental control software on the devices.
It's entirely up to each parent. We do have some parents where the device is completely locked down and the child is just added as a guest and they don't have administration rights to do anything. We've also had parents that have begun like that, and then as they've seen it in use, they've actually removed those controls and things so that they trust their children and know that nothing will be installed that shouldn't be. Again, I'd say it's on a case-by-case basis, perhaps. We have things to stop children searching anything too inappropriate in school because of the firewall, but it's I would certainly encourage parents to make sure they've got proper protection through their broadband provider.
There was a question, Andy, about Microsoft Office 365, which you did cover a little bit later on, but the parent was asking about whether that's something, if it's not already on the device, whether that's something the parents would need to purchase separately or whether the school would download.
Okay. Yeah, so as Nord Anglia has a subscription to that, it is included as part of our subscription. Every child can download that onto their own device, and that's included. There's no cost for that. This year, our teachers help children to do that within the first couple of weeks of bringing devices into school. And if anybody needs additional support with that, for example, because the device is locked, then they tend to take it down to the IT admin team, who will phone parents up and see if they want support with that.
Great. And one parent queried why the parents hadn't been consulted with the decision making.
Obviously, this was introduced with Year 6 a couple of years ago. We did some consultation at that time. I understand it's slightly different with Year 5. We talked to some people who are parents at the school. Is it perhaps a fair point? As we've said in the letter, this is something that's requested. It's not written into our school contracts or anything. We would encourage it because we feel it's really beneficial to children's education. We do sometimes make decisions as a school about minor things to curriculum allocation and so on, where we don't contact parents at every step of the way. And hopefully, through the presentation today, I've alleviated some of the concerns that people have, but I'm very willing to respond to anybody that wants to contact me further about that.
Thanks, Andy. I'll just add to that obviously with any consultation, you're going to get a huge divide of opinion, particularly with technology. And obviously there will be parents who are very pro using technology more in school, and of course there will be parents who have concerns. So I don't think you're going to find any sort of consensus with that, but you know, we do regularly seek feedback from parents, either through things like the DCA or perhaps teachers who have children in school, or just informally with the children themselves about how it's working from their perspective as well.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, I think that's every parent has had the opportunity that had their hand up. So unless there are any other further questions, I'll thank everybody again for joining.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
of course. Okay, so let me confirm the very basic thing. So does DCIS provide a device, or do we have to buy ourselves?
Yes, so it's a bring your own device program. So parents provide the device and it's brought into school.
Okay, right. And so we will have some description about the requirements to the device in maybe a couple of months. So by when do we need to have it? Before the starting year 5?
So by August it would be ideal. When the letter went out at the beginning of March, it did include the BYOD booklet that had some information about recommended requirements for those devices. But if you drop me a message, I'll be happy to share that with you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I see got a few parents leaving now, so thank you very much everybody for joining this morning.
Thank you, Andy. That was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.